Well, thank you for having us today and inviting us, Judge and Commissioner and Commissioner. I'm Jessica Pyska. I'm the District 5 Supervisor for Lake County, and I'm really here to speak about rural county issues. And the biggest point I would like to kind of drill down into is the network availability and network quality that was spoken about earlier. I have a little story to tell about what happened to me last night. I was at a winery ranch area, and it was a high school cross country meet, and my daughter was racing, and there were 4 schools present. 3 of them were from out of the county, didn't have a lot of familiarity with the area. And suddenly a fire broke out just down the road. And this is a fire in the same footprint as the 2016 Clayton fire, started virtually in the same place. They immediately started evacuating the nearby town of Lower Lake. And we're in an area where we have 1 bar of cellular service. And we got huddled up close to the tasting room of the winery to try and figure out, how can I communicate with the CAL FIRE chief who's on site? What's happening? Do we need to evacuate? I can barely communicate with him. Then the power goes out. All the power goes out for the whole south of the county because of this. It ended up being a 28-acre fire. So the kids are out on the course running, and we're not sure how to collect them if we need to leave. I'm communicating with the fire chief. He's saying you're not actually in the evacuation area, but we are evacuating the town of Lower Lake and the high school. Well, in 2016, that fire flipped direction and burned the other way. So I myself am a fire survivor in the 2015 Valley Fire. I lost my home. I had to evacuate very quickly with my family and some animals. I couldn't communicate with the supervisor whose district I was in. He was traveling along the state highway from Middletown to Lower Lake because the power was out and because of congestion. He could not communicate with the fire chiefs, had, dropped call after dropped call. Couldn't get there. Nobody knew what was going on. Then all the cell phones started going off with evacuation notices. And they say, this is the zone that has a mandatory evacuation. These are the zones that have advisory evacuations. Nobody knows what zone they're in because nobody lives there. And you can click on the link of our Zone Haven system, Genesis system, to pull up the map. But guess what? None of us have enough coverage to look at that map and find out where we are. So we have to just call the race, pull the kids off the course, get them in vans, and evacuate to safety. So there's been very little infrastructure improvement and investment in our county in many, many years. You cannot drive around our county consistently and talk on the phone. So if you're in an accident, if you're stranded pregnant like I was once, and you can't reach people and it's getting dark, it's terrifying. So at a minimum, I would like to see required that state highways have full coverage so that we're not driving in and out of these areas where you can't reach people and you're disconnected from emergency services, from your family, from anything else that you might need. So I really appreciate that you bringing that up today. That really is the single most important thing for me, is we need to see our maps change. They have not changed. The coverage maps have not changed significantly in a long, long time. And so if we're looking for equity, rural counties really need increased investment. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Matthew, who can talk more about the needs of our vulnerable community and what that increased investment might look like.
So one thing I want to acknowledge before commenting a little bit more substantially is just the fact that I know that there can be a malalignment in terms of the incentive structure for for-profit companies investing in areas that'll create the greatest return versus the public safety needs that are created by our reliability on those particular services to receive things like emergency messaging. And I want to just state that it is clearly, if we're using voice over IP, if we're using broadband service in situations like what Supervisor Pyska just described, where there are really significant public safety consequences, that's something that matters. And filling in those gaps is something that matters. And we have areas in Lake County communities that, including in the Scotts Valley area, that have, ongoing issues in terms of regular communication availability. And that is, something that should be addressed. I'm also cognizant, though, at the same time that, any increase in the cost to people in vulnerable and, historically impoverished communities like those in Lake County, any increase in the bill also is a matter of significance to the property owner, to the business owner. And so I think looking more broadly at the fact that there is that malalignment, there are areas, particularly think about in high fire threat areas like Lake County, where investment in even, redundant infrastructure is a matter of priority, and yet it's not, investable necessarily to a investor-owned utility or to a telecom provider. So looking at that disconnect and giving some serious thought to how those costs should be proportionally borne by California residents, by ratepayers, by subscribers to services like telecom is something that's certainly a matter of significance. And I wanted to highlight, as I mentioned, the importance of redundancy. And I know Supervisor Pyska, in your district, during periods of winter storms, whether they're really severe, like the winter storms of this past season, or even in future years, there are fairly lengthy periods of time that you're without service. And in part, I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about the disconnect between how quickly service is restored by electrical providers versus telecom providers.
Right. Thank you, Matthew. So we typically have heavy winter storms, and because we have a lack of redundancy and a lack of coverage from multiple sites, when one tower goes out, when the power goes out, we have thousands of people without coverage. And PG&E quickly comes in and regenerizes the lines. And then there's a significant delay. There's a lack of urgency to get the telecom lines back up. And you will just drive down the street and notice them all coiled up in trees. And sometimes it can be weeks. But without that redundancy in place, you've got all these people who are out of power, in the dark, snowed in, and they can't communicate with anybody because everything is down. So we've in the past had a temporary site come in and provide some coverage, but it's only been one time, and every single winter we have these problems. The sites are inaccessible during heavy storms. The trees come down. There's a lot of vegetation maintenance that does not occur to protect that infrastructure. So all of these issues are compounded. But that, I really just can't stress enough, it's the lack of redundancy, that if we're relying on critical infrastructure, one of them going down has mass consequences for almost our entire community.
Yes, and just to dovetail on what you said, those are very serious consequences, very serious public safety concerns in rural areas, and they're also impoverished communities. And so asking the residents of those local areas to bear the entirety of the cost of those necessary redundancies is not fully reasonable. And I just want to make sure that that's said clearly. And so it is a part of a broader conversation, and definitely appreciate the service quality conversation is a critical element, and value the fact that your commission is taking this on right now. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Corey Cordero, Euroc Telecoms Corporation. First, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate being able to weigh in here, and it's been really great hearing from the other panelists.